feel like there's something wrong with the weather? Because if you do, you're not alone. There's millions of people around the world who feel like there is something happening with the weather. You have storms that don't behave like they used to. You have these patterns that just feel off, and these events that keep getting called unprecedented, right? Now, most people chalk this up to, well, I think the media is just stoking the fire here because they're trying to push this whole climate change narrative. And this video isn't about climate change. It's not about any of that. It's about something that's far more sinister than climate change. And it's more, let's just say, hidden than most people even want to believe. So most people that do have this thought, like there is something wrong with the weather, they'll probably, more than likely just dismiss the thought right away. And, they're going to tell themselves that they're imagining things. The weather is too big of a system to be manipulated or to change so drastically. But what if you're not imagining things? What if there is an actual documented pattern that can verify that there is actually something going on with the weather? Now, there's a government document that's on a server right now, on a government server, that's, I think it's like 52 pages, and it was written in 1996, decades ago. And look, guys, I know I covered this document before, but I think it's too important to just forget about and stop talking about it, because what we're seeing is a slow degradation of what we find to be normal, because they've been slowly chipping away at our universal sense of normalcy. Everything just seems to be moving so quickly now. And this is by design, in my opinion. So this document, this government document is called Weather is a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. This is a real document. This is not conspiracy theory. And it talks about owning the weather in 2025, not 2030, not someday, 2025. And obviously we've passed that date, right? And the thing is, nobody probably told you about this document. Unless you've been following this channel, you probably have no idea it exists because people don't even talk about it. And one thing I think people really need to understand about this is that this isn't from a conspiracy website. It's hosted on archive.org. And it can be found in these government databases. I think it's like ntis.gov, which is a federal database. So this document was written by a bunch of Air Force colonels and, higher ups and officers and stuff like that. And it was commissioned by the Air Force Chief of Staff himself. So this is in page 10, and it's a direct quote from the document. It says, in 2025, U.S. aerospace forces can own the weather by capitalizing on emerging technologies and focusing developments of those technologies to war-fighting applications. This is right from the horse's mouth, people. Own the weather for war-fighting applications by 2025. They put this in a government database and they never mentioned it again. Does that seem suspicious to you? Because it does to me. Now, let's look what they wrote, right? This is no interpretation. This is no speculation. This is just their own words. And you can verify everything for yourself, and you can decide what it means. Because I'm not saying that, they're actually controlling the weather specifically. What I'm saying is, I think it's naive to assume that they're not, all right? Because we can take all the evidence and all the documentation and everything we see happening around the world, and we can piece it together in a way that it does seem to suggest that there is some sort of control over the weather, okay? Now, we're gonna get into all the skeptical arguments here in a minute, but first I wanna read a couple things right from this document so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So the document opens with this 1957 quote that's from President Eisenhower's Advisory Committee on Weather Control. Their conclusion was this, that weather modification could become a more important weapon than the atom bomb. Interesting. More important weapon than the atom bomb. This was 1957, mind you, way before the supposed moon landing, right? Before the internet, obviously. Before we were thinking about modern technology like affecting us day to day, they were thinking about using it to weaponize the weather. And the funny thing is, too, there's actually more documents that point it back to weather modification happening in 1947. All right, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. And this is the part that they leave out of the history books and conveniently just gloss over when people are talking about this, because all the skeptics, they're going to say it's a conspiracy theory. Let's turn back to, I think it's table 1, page 10. It's called the Operation Capabilities Matrix. Look at the left column here. It says degrade enemy forces. And here are some of the tools that they want to degrade enemy forces with. Precipitation enhancement, basically flood the roads. Storm enhancement, deny their operations. Participation denial, induce a drought. Fog removal, strip their concealment. Okay, oh, it sounds logical, right? And then you look at the right column, it says enhance friendly forces. Precipitation avoidance, keep the supply lines clear. Storm modification, choose your battlefield conditions. Fog generation, increase your concealment. Okay, so here they're playing both sides of it. They're saying for the enemies, we can deny them rain, or we can make it more rain to hamper their movements. And then, to help the good guys, what we're going to do is we're going to make it not rain, and we're going to give some fog so that people can't see what we're doing. Guys, think about the implications of this. This is an operational planning matrix in an official Air Force document with a development timeline that was targeting 2025 that obviously has come and gone. So do you really think that they didn't succeed in their goals? Because this is documented. It's not theory. It's not conspiracy theory. And I'm not even giving my own interpretation on this. So far, what we're talking about is nothing but the documented facts, okay? And here's what makes it interesting, in my opinion, is that when they wrote this in 1996, they'd already been doing weather modifications like this for nearly 30 years. I think it was in March 1967 in Vietnam. There was a classified operation with the code name Popeye. Have you heard of this? Most people haven't. So the pilots of this operation, they had a slogan. It was "Make mud, not war." Cute, huh? For 5 years, these pilots flew, I think it was over 2,500 missions, sorties, cloud seeding sorties over Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. And what they did was they dispersed silver iodide into these monsoon clouds with a single goal: to extend the rainy season by, I think it was 30 to 45 days, and turn the Ho Chi Minh Trail into an impassable swamp. Right? They're trying to deny the enemy's movements. And while this operation was running, while people were actually actively participating in this operation, what happened? The Defense Secretary of the United States testified before Congress. And when he asked about weather modification, he denied it. He said the United States wasn't doing it. He said it's not true. He called Congress conspiracy theorists. Well, then it came out that he was lying to them. So this is another lesson, guys. When you hear somebody testify to Congress about something specific, don't take it as fact, because they'll sit there and they'll lie right to the face of the congressmen, the congresswomen, and they'll lie to the American people because they can. They've been doing it and they'll get away with it. They're not held accountable for their lies. So what would make them not lie? So in 1971, I think it was, there was a journalist that broke the story. And then the Pentagon Papers confirmed it. And then the New York Times ran it in, I think, 1972. So basically, it became a big story that they were doing weather modification in Vietnam actively while lying to Congress. Okay? But it doesn't end there, because this is where a pattern emerges. Because Operation Popeye wasn't the first weather modification program. No. The first one, as we alluded to earlier, was in 1947, and it was called Project Cirrus. And it was the first attempt to modify a hurricane. Scientists actually succeeded, and they seeded a hurricane off the coast of Florida with, I think they used dry ice, like a large quantity of dry ice. So what happened was the hurricane that they seeded, it changed course and it hit Georgia. It hit Georgia. So they were able to manipulate this hurricane in a way that it steered into Georgia, and they kind of panicked, and the project was buried. Nobody ever talked about it again. The bottom line here is the government affected this hurricane's path nearly 80 years ago.
That's a long time.
It sure is.
And then came Project Stormfury. Have you heard of that? I think it ran from like 1962 to 1983, if I'm not mistaken. And that's like, over 20 years of government-funded hurricane modification research? They seeded 4 hurricanes on 8 different occasions, and they claimed 10 to 30% in wind reduction in half of those attempts. So they're basically just playing around with the weather, seeing how far their technology will let them go. But the program ended because, on paper anyway, as far as the public is concerned, they couldn't definitively prove that the results weren't like natural variations of weather patterns. But maybe that's just the story they gave us, because that's 20 years of public research. What were they doing privately? And we know whenever something is, whenever it comes out publicly, there's a whole nother private aspect to that usually we never even hear about. And if we do, it's so far in the future that it makes the information in there irrelevant. So this brings us to, I think it was April 1997, the Secretary of Defense was speaking at a conference it was like about terrorism and weapons of mass destruction and stuff like that at the University of Georgia. Well, you want to know what his exact words were? You're not going to believe this. And I'm going to quote right now. "Others are engaging even in an ecotype of terrorism, whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes and volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves."
Did he just say what I think he said?
It can't be true.
Oh, it's true.
Wait, he admitted it?
Yes, he admitted it.
I can't stress how important this is, guys. You got to listen to the words because they're laying it out. They're telling us exactly what we need to hear. Right there, they're admitting that EMF waves, electromagnetic fields, can and do affect the Earth itself, affect our weather, affect volcanoes and earthquakes. And that's exactly what quote unquote conspiracy theorists have been claiming HAARP has the capability of doing. So here you have the Secretary of Defense admitting that what happens at HAARP is actually not a conspiracy theory, that there is truth to it, all right? But that's not all he said. He added this at the end. He said, it's real. And that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts. Think about that. He's admitting that, yes, it is real, and yes, we have to intensify our efforts or else we will be left behind. So, do you honestly think that since 1997, when the Secretary of Defense made this comment, that people haven't been working on this? And guys, I can't overstate this. The Secretary of Defense himself, 1 year after this whole weather modification document was published, confirmed that the technology is indeed real. Think about this. I mean, this is... It's a little bit too much for a lot of people, but the world that we live in is not as cut and dry as they make it appear to be on the nightly news. So here's another interesting thing that most people have never heard about before. Did you know that there is a weather modification treaty that was signed, I think in 1977 through the United Nations? Yeah. So there was a convention that banned the military use of environmental modification techniques. So if it's not real, if it's a conspiracy theory, if it's, if there's no truth to this at all, why would 78 nations sign this document saying that the military does not have the right anywhere to modify the weather? Why? And by the way, the United States was one of the countries who signed this treaty, the same exact year that Operation Popeye was exposed. So here you have another instance of the United States publicly saying, oh, we're not going to do this. We're going to sign this treaty because this is bad. People shouldn't be able to do this, while doing the exact same thing that they signed the treaty against.
Ancient cultures used to do native tribal dances to pray for rain, to bring areas that were very dry and have good rainfall. In the 20th century, clouds were seeded by numerous countries around the globe with various chemicals to produce rain. China was just doing this over the summer in Beijing to make sure that there weren't any rain, that there wasn't any rain during the Olympics. But all this has changed dramatically with the U.S. military's secretive research and plans to control the planet's natural weather. This has not been given very much press, and we have to remember that we have a corporate-owned press where 85% of radio, television, and print media is owned by 5 corporations. So they're not going to talk about things that are of really serious consequence, and that's somewhat of the blessing, a mixed blessing of the internet, but there's certainly plenty of information on weather modification. The Air Force is on record as saying, quote, they want to control the weather by 2025, and we are not talking about just seeding the clouds for rain. Weather modification means, quote, any activity performed with the intention of producing artificial changes in the composition, behavior, or dynamics of the atmosphere, unquote. And as of April this year, there are more than 150 different weather modification programs around the world. Since about 2000, the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy have been spraying the entire United States sky with a toxic brew of chemicals and other biologic agents. Just want to show you something. We have 2 different kinds of trails in the sky right now. One are called contrails. How many of you know what contrails are? Contrails are what have been around from the ends of planes since World War II. These are very, very short exhaust trails that usually evaporate within a few minutes. You just look up at the sky and you'll just see a jet, sometimes with 4 trails, but it evaporates pretty quickly. How many of you know what chemtrails are? The military and some commercial planes are spraying us with what are called chemtrails. I want you to look at these. And oftentimes, before there's a weather front, there are heavy assaults from these planes just before a weather front is changed and comes in. Military and some commercial jets have been fitted with huge barrels of at least 49 different kinds of documented chemical poisons. Among other documented ingredients in this toxic man-made clouds are pathogenic molds, fungi, weaponized viruses, and made in some places like the secret site at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is supposed to be a cancer site, but there are a number of scholars and professors tracking this that have big questions about this. Barium and nanoaluminum particles. What do these do to the human body? Barium is an alkaline earth mineral. It was discovered in 1774. At low doses, it can act as a muscle stimulant. At high doses, it detrimentally affects the heart and the nervous system. Barium is toxic to all mammals, and that means not just humans. Aluminum, which is the most abundant metal in the Earth's crust, is known to diminish kidney function and destroy brain cells and cognitive function. Just think about it. Just between the aluminum and the mercury that we're breathing all the time, we've got already a serious issue about brain function and cognitive function. There is also documented evidence that the aluminum in chemtrails is released as nanoparticles, and that when they reach the Earth environment for wildlife in lakes and streams, it's causing serious problems with wildlife there. Researchers are also finding that nanoparticles interfere with the growth of plants. Nanotechnology is totally unregulated. Just this past month, a new research report came out showing and documenting for the first time that these nanoparticles actually go through the skin. Well, if you breathe them, whether they go through the skin or whether you're inhaling them, it's still a problem, a serious problem. Other toxic chemicals that have been documented include ammonia, ammonium chloride, bismuth, cadmium, one of the most toxic elements also in the environment, hexabromobenzene, lead, potassium iodine, potassium perchlorate, sulfur, and xylene. This is just a toxic spew of carcinogens, serious respiratory and skin irritants, cardiovascular and gastrointestinal toxicants. I'm asking, is there a relationship between asthma, now the number 3 killer in the United States, and staggering rates of it for small children, up from number 10 a decade ago, and the chemtrails? According to Clifford Carnicom, who's been studying chemtrails for 9 years now, and I met with him to discuss this in detail this summer, quote, "The true nature of these aerosol operations remain undisclosed and closed to fair examination by the public. All of this is being done by stealth to keep us in ignorance." There is a long, long history in the United States, tragically, not the kind of history that you learn in college textbooks, about secret chemical exposure to which Americans were subjected. I'd like to read you just a few of them. In 1931, Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, under the auspices of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Investigations, infected human subjects with cancer cells. They were not told about it. He later went on to establish the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Facility in Maryland, Utah, and Panama, and then was named to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. While there, he began a series of radiation exposures, experiments on American soldiers and civilians in hospitals. In 1942, Chemical Warfare Services began mustard gas experiences on approximately 4,000 servicemen. The experiments continued until 1945 and made use of the Seventh-day Adventists who chose to become human guinea pigs rather than serve on duty. 1965, prisoners in a prison in Philadelphia were subjected to dioxin. Dioxin is so toxic, it is a byproduct of chlorine when it breaks down, whether it's in Clorox or in tampons, and a teaspoon could literally kill the entire planet. Dioxin is a carcinogen, and it's part of Agent Orange that was suspected even before the military used it for Desert Storm. In 1996, the Department of Defense admits that Desert Storm exposure for all of the military they were exposed to chemical agents, including Agent Orange. So I have questions that have to be part of an urgently needed public discussion and outcry. When is this going to stop? Obviously, you don't know, and I would urge you, they're outside. There's a list of websites that you can go to, not just to Clifford Carnicom's, but this is the most, his website is the most well-documented one with lots of medical information. I've talked to over 100 doctors just in this past 6 months, naturopaths, MDs, all sorts of people in healthcare, and there we have staggering rates of upper respiratory and cardiovascular problems that we never used to have. There's a brand new emerging field, and that's called environmental cardiology, and they're not even dealing with the issues of weather modifications and chemtrails. I'd like to know, how are the real drought conditions by nature exacerbated by a constant spew of aerosols in the chemtrails? How much of global warming or climate change is actually caused by billions of tons of these aerosols that have been sprayed over us for the last 8 years without our permission? It's not just CO2 emissions that we have to deal with, but we have to deal with weather modification. How is weather modification by the military destabilizing our planet's natural weather? A controversial weather modification bill was just passed. Bush just signed it to the 109th Congress. There was no public discussion. These bills did not include any agricultural, water, EPA, or public representatives, and did not have any provisions for congressional, state, county, or public oversight of either expenditures, medical, and/or environmental consequences. In other words, we've really been guinea pigs for at least the last 8 years with literally every breath we take. 7 days a week, 365 days a year. What we are breathing now, as one of my dear friends says, the indoor air is just the same. What the indoor air is just the outdoor air inside. In addition, the Pentagon is on record this summer as saying it wants to resume open-air testing of biologic weapons. There's a flyer outside on this with some research that Professor Francis Boyle has done. And he's been quoted recently as saying, the Pentagon is fully prepared to launch biological warfare, yet much of this technology is being used on us without our permission. We are signatories to no germ warfare and to the Nuremberg trials.
This is all wrong. How dare you?
Owning the weather, controlling storms, commanding the sky itself. What does that sound like to you? Well, there have been ancient texts that address this exact thing thousands of years ago. In Job 37, it says, quote, "He says to the snow, fall to the earth, and to the rain shower, be a mighty downpour. He loads the clouds with moisture. At his direction, they swirl around over the face of the whole earth and do whatever he commands." And then you have Psalm 148, lightning, hail, snow, and clouds, stormy winds that do his bidding. Weather answers to somebody. Scripture is clear about who holds that authority. And there's a pattern. There's a pattern that runs through human history that shows that man likes to reach for control of things that he has no right controlling in the first place. I mean, you can trace this pattern back from the Tower of Babel to the pre-flood world, all the way through history. There is some sort of attempt at trying to usurp the glory of God, trying to control what's supposed to be God's, okay? And that's, let's just say it's not going to end up well for the people who are trying to usurp the power of God. In the document we talked about, it said, owning the weather. Think about how they phrased that. They're claiming authority over something that answers to God and God alone. Mark chapter 4, Jesus was in a boat with his disciples. A violent storm threatens to sink them. What happens? Well, they all get scared. He stops the storm, right? He stands up and says 3 words. And what happened? The wind stopped. The sea went calm. And the disciples looked at each other and said, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And that should be obvious, right? Because creation obeys the creator. He's the one that created everything. Of course it's going to obey him. He is the ultimate boss. So the bottom line here, guys, is whatever capabilities do get developed, whatever programs run, these classified programs, whatever they are, whatever emerges from these black sites and these unmarked budgets, well, none of it really matters. None of it really supersedes that authority. What they're trying to do is steal that authority. They're trying to utilize the power of nature for themselves, but it will ultimately fail because God is the only one in control, like I said before. So the question isn't whether or not they've tried to manipulate the weather. The question becomes, was it successful? Put it in the comments below. What do you guys think? Can they manipulate the weather? Are they manipulating the weather? And did they manipulate the weather? Right? Tell me. Am I just reaching? Am I putting things together that don't make any sense? Or is this a logical conclusion based on the facts, based on the demonstrated history that we've talked about of weather manipulation, weather modification in general? Put it in the comments. I'd love to read what you guys think about this. And I want to thank you all for watching this video. We'll see you guys next time. God bless you all.